The Trail of Tears refers to the forceful relocation of southeastern Native American communities as a result of the Indian Removal Act. In 1838, by way of Andrew Jackson's policy, the Cherokee community was forced to surrender all their land east of the Mississippi River and migrate to what is present-day Oklahoma. This journey was aptly named the Trail of Tears because of the devastating effects it had on the natives and the spirit of distraught that fell over the people. During this involuntary march away from their homeland, the migrants faced starvation, diseases, and exhaustion. The Trail of Tears resulted in death and devastation. More than 4,000 people died on this long journey. The Trail of Tears is considered one of the most tragic times in U.S. history due to the rapid relocation of the native people. The Cherokee were made to leave with such haste that they were unable to pack their belongings. As they walked away, whites were already looting their homes. This event is also regarded as the start of Indian extermination by the U.S. government. After the American Revolution against Britain and the eventual creation of the United States, the Indians were regarded as a separate nation, existing within a sovereign country. Based on the advice of Benjamin Franklin, the civilized tribes had developed towns, governments, and a written language as evidence commitment to peaceful coexistence with the new American people. Sadly, the white settlers were mostly interested in the resources, such as gold mines on the rich and productive land occupied by the Indians. As a result, the U.S. government started on a long campaign, marked by false promises, broken treaties, and eventual threats of military force and recurring racist attitudes, in order to drive out the Indians from their native territory. The U.S. government passed the Indian Removal Act in the year of 1830, which would soon result in the dreadful Trail of Tears. The Indians were moved out beyond the western part of the United States in a mass exodus. The Indians expected that the national government would pay them hundreds of thousands of dollars to relocate at least past the Mississippi River. This would ensure the new American settlers continued growth and prosperity in their new country, while the poor native tribes would get a vast amount of money. It was sold to the Indians as a win-win. The most prominent of those forced from their native lands by the U.S. government were the 5 civilized tribes: the Choctaw, Cherokee, Seminole, Chickasaw, and the Creek. These tribes constituted the majority of more than 60,000 Indians driven out of their land. Because of their adoption of some Western cultural practices, leadership forms, and organization, they were distinguished from other Indian populations and considered civilized. Even though they had functional social systems based on property ownership, government offices, and established schools much like in Europe, the U.S. government did not recognize them as civilized enough. This led to the belief that the Indians needed to be relocated, by force if necessary. The government was so caught by fear and greed that they never stopped to consider that their plans were wrong and violated the basic human rights of the native people. The 1830 Indian Removal Act gave President Jackson the ability to relocate the Indians without their consent. The act required that they be compensated for the relocation. The Choctaw Indians in 1831 were the first who relocated, and they became a perfect model for the successful relocations. The Seminole followed the Choctaw in 1832, then the Creek in the year 1834, the Chickasaw Indians in the year 1837. For years, the Cherokee tribe fought the move to the west, stating that it was wrong, and that because the Cherokee were considered a sovereign nation, they ought to be able to stay on their land. John Ross, the chief of the Cherokee tribe, strongly stood for his people and fought for their rights. Eventually, he attempted to sue the government for their heinous acts. Of course, the judges ruled in favor of the United States government, but the Cherokee tribe did not budge. Finally, in 1838, The fairly new president, Martin Van Buren, ordered a small militia to hold the Cherokee people at gunpoint until they left their own land. Defeated, John Ross had no answer. He led his tribe across the large country away from their home, eventually to modern-day Oklahoma. In all, it's estimated that more than 46,000 native Indians from these southern states had been forcefully relocated from their homelands. None, though, suffered as had the Cherokee. After their arduous journey, the Cherokee expected to live in peace, and this would not be the case. They were assigned white overseers who made maintaining their land grants and tribal registration so difficult that by the early 20th century, the tribes wavered on extinction. While tens of thousands of Cherokee could no longer live on their land or prove their tribal affiliation. Perhaps that's why the Cherokee believed that if you have one drop of Cherokee blood, you are a Cherokee.